On Staten Island, the legend of Cropsey has never faded. They say he prowls the dense forests and abandoned sewer tunnels where the darkness never recedes. Towering, lurching, and armed with a rusted blade, he stalks the unlucky who dare to enter. Old toys, childish sketches, and pale, staring eyes hidden deep in the shadows are all that remain of those who vanish. And anyone who hears the scrape of metal dragging across the night never returns. Wait, you'll be all. The dirt road that cut into the depths of Staten Island's forest had long since been reduced to a faint scar beneath the weeds. Branches clawed at jackets as the group of 4 teenagers pushed forward, each scratch leaving pale marks like ghostly warnings. The fading afternoon light bled weakly through the canopy, falling in sickly patches across their path, as if the forest itself whispered that they should turn back. Willowbrook Camp revealed itself after a bend in the trail. Rows of sagging cabins with collapsed roofs and walls that peeled like rotting skin. The playground at the entrance stood frozen in silence, where a rusted swing swayed lazily, creaking in the breeze with a sound too hollow, too human. Nearby, a warped steel slide jutted upward, its base sunken deep into damp soil, like the headstone of a childhood long buried. Inside the first cabin, dust hung so thick that every step sent clouds rising like pale smoke. Broken bunk beds lay scattered in heaps, their frames twisted. In the corner slumped a gutted teddy bear, stuffing spilling from its torn belly like an unhealed wound. On the stained wall, faint crayon drawings still lingered, childish stick figures holding hands beneath the looming shadow of something impossibly tall. The children said nothing, but their eyes clung to every fragment left behind. One boy picked up a tiny tricycle, its rusted wheels squealing with each turn. The sound echoed through the hollow cabin, absurdly small, yet unbearably heavy, as if carried from a past that refused to rest. The sun dipped lower, smothered by the tree line, and shadows swallowed the camp. The air thickened, damp and cold, seeping into lungs until each breath felt stolen. From somewhere distant, a crow shrieked, a harsh, broken cry, then went silent, leaving a suffocating stillness. One of the teens tugged open the warped door of the storage shed. The stench of mildew rolled out to greet them. Piled inside were forgotten relics of play. Dolls with fractured faces, toy trucks missing wheels, a child's cap stained with a dark rust-red bloom. On a crooked wooden shelf leaned a stack of photographs, their images blurred by time. The children leaned closer. Each picture showed camp kids lined up in uniform, smiling with mouths too stiff, eyes too empty. A gust of wind slipped through the cracked boards, making the photos quiver. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire camp exhaled, heavy and tired. And in that instant, the intruders understood. They were not the first to wander here in decades. Something had remained. Something that watched, patient and hungry, from just beyond the dark. Night had swallowed Staten Island's woods whole, pressing darkness against every breath. The teenagers moved with flashlights in hand, their beams slicing thin arcs across the ruins of an abandoned bathhouse on the camp's edge. Hingis groaned as a sagging wooden door surrendered, opening into a chamber that reeked of mold and stagnant air. Broken tiles glistened with pools of black water, each reflecting the wavering light like liquid mirrors. On the peeling walls, crude chalk scrawls spread in tangled clusters, dozens of small figures drawn hand in hand, circling a towering shape with arms that scraped the ground. Its face was nothing more than a hollow smear of darkness. The group froze, beams quivering as they swept across the room. Every wall bore the same tableau. Children gathered at the side of a looming skeletal giant. By the sinks, dark stains had dried into the concrete, trailing downward like veins of rust. They clung stubbornly, cracked into the floor as if time itself had tried and failed to erase them. The air shifted as a cold gust slithered in, carrying with it the sour stench of damp fabric, burnt plastic, and something far more rotten. In one corner lay a discarded Polaroid camera, its body choked with dust. One of the kids lifted it, finding a few photos wedged inside. Under the flashlight's glare, faces emerged, children smiling with distorted mouths, eyes empty sockets of pale gray. In one photo, behind the group of children, something massive loomed. Its outline was blurred, wrong, as though it had bled into the picture from another world. Then came a sound, soft at first, leaking upward through the pipes beneath the floor. A hiss, faint but alive, shifting into something higher, sharper. Laughter. A chorus of giggles rising and falling, echoing as if dozens of unseen children were playing just beneath their feet. The tiles trembled. Ripples spread across the stagnant puddles. The teenagers stared at one another, wide-eyed and mute. A flashlight beam swept toward the far end of the corridor. There, fresh chalk marks gleamed brighter than the others, drawn with unsettling clarity, and pressed into the dust beside them was a tiny handprint, wet, glistening, impossibly recent. The room fell silent, as though holding its breath. No wind, no birds, no sound but the hammering of their own hearts. And then it came, rising from the bowels of the tunnels below, the scrape of metal, dragging slow and heavy, rattling through the brick walls, announcing something that had already begun to move. That dragging metal sound pulsed again and again, steady as a death beat beneath the earth. The teenagers tried to pull away from the bathhouse, but their steps betrayed them, drifting toward the direction of the noise, as though something unseen guided their feet. Wind shrieked through the shattered slats, tilting flashlight beams into fractured arcs, illuminating shadows that seemed to close tighter with every step. Behind the rotting cabins they found it, a sewer hatch left slightly ajar. From the gap rose a chill so sharp it felt like ice in their lungs, carrying the rancid stench of carrion rotting in mud. The iron cover was streaked with rust, and below it yawned a ladder that vanished into endless dark. They shone their lights downward. The walls gleamed wet, veined with moss, every drip echoing like a clock tick counting down. Small handprints smeared the slick surface, layer upon layer of tiny palms, as if children had climbed down one after another. Some were fresh, wet enough that water still trickled in thin rivulets. One of them, braver or more foolish than the rest, set a foot on the ladder. The rungs groaned with a metallic scream under the weight. One by one, the others followed, swallowed into the dark. With every step deeper, the sound grew louder, not distant anymore, but crawling close. The deliberate scrape of something immense dragging its blade. It moved slowly, arrogantly, as though certain that prey could never escape. The tunnels stretched before them, endless and waterlogged. Stagnant pools lapped at their ankles, stinking of rust and mold. Abandoned relics littered the sludge, the bent frame of a stroller, a child's shoe gnawed apart, the headless remains of stuffed animals drifting like corpses. When the flashlights swept the walls, the chalk drawings appeared again. This time sharper, crueler, children with eyes washed white, clutching hands around a bent, towering figure whose grasp held a scythe. The whispers returned, clearer now, flitting through the tunnel like breath against their ears. High-pitched giggles swelled and faded, skipping from wall to wall, circling them, crawling under their skin. The water rippled, though nothing moved. Then the beam of a flashlight swept forward and froze. At the tunnel's end, a shape stood motionless. Too tall, shoulders hunched, head canted, unnaturally to the side. Arms dangled near the ground, one fist clutching a wide, corroded blade. The steel's tip scraped across the concrete with a shriek that shivered the air. The light trembled over his face, blurred flesh, mottled and uneven, as if dragged too far across bone. A face without balance, without mercy. And from the hollow sockets of his eyes, twin glints flared back like a predator's in the night. The teenagers froze, breaths caught, hearts hammered against ribs like prisoners against walls. And then, as though the light itself had awakened him, the figure moved, lurching, limping, yet impossibly quick. The scythe shrieked louder, grinding against concrete, the sound swelling until it rattled the walls. Water splashed violently with each heavy step, as if the entire tunnel were gasping, choking in rhythm with his approach. A scream tore loose, shattering the silence. Panic surged, and the group bolted, flashlights scattering wild beams across the dripping walls. Behind them, the dragging blade struck harder, faster, echoing through the cavern. And woven through the metallic shrieks was laughter. Thin, cruel laughter in many voices, the laughter of children long broken. Footsteps thundered behind them, heavy and relentless, each one reverberating through the marrow of their bones. The teenagers stumbled through the twisting tunnels, flashlights flaring wildly against the walls. The chalk drawings multiplied with every turn, little figures grinning with mouths stretched too wide, while the looming, hunched giant grew larger, swallowing entire walls, as if the tunnel itself was painting the hunter that stalked them. Filthy water splashed cold against their legs, sharp as ice. From the cracks above, the wind hissed, but tangled in the draught came whispers. Children's voices. Don't run. Stay. Come play with us. The words spiraled through the corridor, impossible to trace, near and far, all at once. Suddenly, one of them slipped. A flashlight clattered across the flooded floor, spinning, then landing with its beam locked onto the tunnel's far end. He was there. Tall, skeletal shoulders twisted, one arm dangling lower than the other. The scythe scraped the ground with a metallic groan, each drag louder than breath. The group shrieked, scrambling to their feet, but it was too late. Cropsey lunged forward. A long arm swung, the blade slicing through the dark. No blood, no spray. Only the hollow scream of steel cleaving air. The light flickered, died, then surged back. One of them was gone. Only a torn backpack bobbed in the filthy water. Panic tore through the survivors. They bolted deeper, yet the tunnel coiled endlessly, stretching like a labyrinth with no exit. Every corner they turned, cold wind rushed from ahead, carrying shrill giggles that echoed like knives. On the walls, the handprints smeared thicker, wetter, as though pressed fresh by unseen palms. A flashlight beam veered right into a circular chamber. Its domed ceiling dripped with condensation, and scattered chairs lay broken in heaps. Shredded stuffed animals slumped in corners, while crooked frames dangled from the walls. At the room's center, a long table stood beneath a rotting green cloth, set with broken plates and children's toys arranged like offerings. The group stopped, gasping. The air felt swollen, pressing against their lungs. The room was waiting. Then, from behind the table, he emerged. Cropsy, Ma. No longer a shadow. Whole. His body warped, his face sagging like wax melting under flame. Deep sockets burned with a feral gleam, catching the flashlight's jittering beams. In his grasp, the scythe tilted, its blade mottled with rust and streaks of dried red. He moved closer, halting, deliberate, confident. The way a predator closes the space when it knows the corner has already been sealed. Each step struck like a drumbeat inside their chests. The air chilled, thickened, suffocating. They backed against the wall, slick with moss, nowhere left to run. Then, all at once, the picture frames fell. Glass shattered across the floor. From behind the broken panes, children's faces stared out. Eyes rolled white, mouths split into jagged grins. The voices came next, hundreds of them, threading directly into their skulls. Sit down. The feast is ready. The flashlights flickered, then died. The chamber collapsed into absolute dark. And in that void, only one sound remained. The long, deliberate sweep of a scythe, sliding across concrete. Slow, certain, inescapable. Nyani. The blackness swallowed the entire chamber, so thick it weighed down every breath. There was no light anymore. Only the steady drip of water, the frantic thump of hearts, and above all the unending scrape of a scythe dragged across concrete. One of them screamed, flicking a lighter to life. The tiny flame stuttered, casting a trembling glow over Cropsy's face, just inches away. Flesh sagged like melted wax, one socket hollow, the other gleaming with a feral yellow spark. His breath stank of rust and rot, the stench of blood clinging to every exhale. The scythe swung. A scream was cut short. The flame snuffed out. Silence, then the splash of water, as though the tunnel had just swallowed another soul whole. The survivors staggered forward, plunging deeper into the maze. But the tunnels weren't the same anymore. The paths twisted endlessly, corridors folding into each other like a nightmare with no escape. Every footstep echoed unnaturally long, as though the ground itself refused to carry them closer to safety. Behind them, the dragging steel sang on the concrete, sometimes distant, sometimes right at their heels. Cropsy was playing. Another stumbled, their flashlight tumbling into the water. Its glow flickered just enough to reveal the figures. Rows of children standing shoulder to shoulder in the tunnel. Faces chalk white, eyes hollow, mouths cracked into rigid smiles. Tiny hands reached out, whispering, "Stay with us." When Cropsy stepped forward, the children's shapes melted into him, their pale faces vanishing into the grotesque swell of his form. His arm lifted. Another body was gone. At last, only one remained. Breath ragged, eyes wide with hopeless terror, they ran on and on. Then, light, a faint glimmer ahead. An open manhole cover, spilling the glow of street lamps into the dark. The survivor clawed their way toward it, trembling fingers curling over the icy rung of the ladder. But the darkness thickened behind them, pressing close, heavy with the stench of rust and decay. A hand, long, deformed, skin hanging loose, closed over their shoulder. Cold breath, brushed their ear. For the briefest moment, they looked up and saw safety just above. A police cruiser rolling by, red and blue lights painting across the manhole's lip. They tried to scream, but no sound came. The scythe fell. Darkness sealed shut. Above ground, Staten Island lay quiet beneath the night sky. No one knew what had happened below, where children's laughter echoed once more, mingling with the scrape of steel on concrete. And the legend of Cropsey had never ended. No. In a forsaken graveyard of New England, no trees of wood take root. Instead, they rise from human bone, ribs twisting into skeletal branches, skulls swaying like pale, hollow fruit. Among them moves the gravekeeper, an ancient shadow, silently tending his garden of the damned. Each soul of the unfortunate, once sown, blossoms into another tree of bone, feeding the forest that should never have been. Nen Passy. The fog of New England clung to the earth like a burial shroud, veiling the narrow path that wound up the hill where the old cemetery lay. Michael Hale, a man in his 40s, walked slowly, one hand gripping a weathered leather notebook. An archaeologist by trade, he had little patience for folklore. To him, this graveyard was nothing more than a forgotten relic of the 17th century. Before arriving, Michael had heard the villagers' strange warnings. They told him never to set foot on the hill after sunset. They whispered of pale figures gliding through the mist, of groans rising from beneath the earth, of trees that grew not from wood but from bone. He had laughed, dismissing their words as superstition woven from fear. But the suffocating silence here gnawed at his certainty. At the crest of the hill, Michael stopped before a gate of blackened iron, rusted and twisted. The carvings of crossed bones were nearly worn away. A stone tablet bore a fading Latin inscription, Hic silentis locantur. Here, the silent still speak. He pressed his hand against the gate. The chill bit like metal drawn straight from ice. Inside stretched a garden of the dead. Tombstones leaned and fractured, their inscriptions lost to moss. Weeds choked the soil, yet here and there, pale shapes jutted from the earth like limestone shards. Michael crouched and realized they were fragments of bone, disturbingly clean, as though placed there deliberately rather than left to decay beneath the soil. Michael opened his notebook and began to record everything. The shape of graves, the weathered symbols, even the position of the bones. Then came a creak, sharp, deliberate. Michael's head snapped up. Across the cemetery, near the largest tomb, stood a figure. The fading light sketched a gaunt old man with a hunched back, a long coat trailing the ground, and a rusted spade in his hand. He did not move, yet his sunken eyes seemed fixed on Michael from within the hollow dark of their sockets. Michael swallowed hard. He had not expected a caretaker. Relief should have come, but instead, a cold shiver clawed its way down his spine. The old man's body did not shift, yet the creak came again, like a gate closing of its own accord. Michael turned. The iron gate stood shut behind him, silent and immovable, as if it had never opened at all. Ah! Michael instinctively stepped back as the old man advanced. His black coat dragged across the wet grass, with a sound like bones grinding together. The hollows of his eyes were deep and sunken, his stare pressing against Michael's chest, as if trying to pierce straight through him. "Night has fallen," the man rasped, his voice corroded like rusted iron. "This place does not belong to the living." Michael forced himself to remain steady. He raised the worn leather notebook, his tone firm. "I'm an archaeologist. I'm here only to survey these old graves. I'll cause no trouble." A crooked smile bent the old man's face. "Survey?" he echoed, tapping the head of his spade against the ground 3 times. The sound reverberated hollow and strange, not the thud of solid earth, but the echo of a void beneath. This soil does not hold history. It feeds. A chill ran through Michael, but pride in his profession pushed him forward. "If you are the caretaker, then surely you understand the archaeological value of this place. Some of these stones date back to the 17th century, perhaps even earlier." The old man bowed his head, his trembling hand stroking the shaft of the spade. "My name is Elias. I have tended this ground longer than anyone remembers. Those stones tell you nothing. What truly lives here does not rest above the earth." The wind stirred, carrying a rustling like countless hands scratching beneath the soil. Michael froze, his heart hammering. Through the grass, he glimpsed pale shapes, finger bones, writhing upward, retreating just as quickly. He blinked, and they were gone. Only the grass swayed. Elias watched him still, his lips moving as though in prayer. "You should not remain past dark. After sunset, the soil hungers." Michael drew a sharp breath, etching the words into memory, though his rational mind refused surrender. "I need only 1 night of study. Tomorrow morning, if you wish, I'll be gone." Elias regarded him in silence, then let out a low, broken laugh that cracked like brittle bone. "1 night, more than enough for the earth to notice you." He turned and shuffled deeper among the graves, his shadow dissolving into the leaning stones. Michael thought to call after him, but his throat tightened, no sound emerging. The headstones around him seemed to lean closer, their shadows tangling together like skeletal arms reaching outward. By the time the last light drained from the sky, Michael stood alone, the leather notebook open in his shaking hands. In the suffocating dark, only the scratch of his pen on paper could be heard. Yet beneath the damp soil, another sound stirred, an endless rasping, as though hundreds of skeletons breathed in rhythm with him. Noir. Night fell over New England as swiftly as if some unseen hand had snuffed out a vast lantern in the sky. The cemetery drowned beneath a heavy curtain of darkness, lit only by a pale crescent moon, its glow spilling across the crooked stones. Michael stood frozen, pen halted above the page. A strange silence pressed down. No insects, no owls, only the restless wind spiraling through ancient crypts. Then the sound returned. At first it was no more than the patter of pebbles, but it grew, grinding, splintering, the brittle crack of something breaking far beneath the soil. Michael staggered back, eyes locked on the grass at his feet. The earth swelled upward, as though something beneath clawed for release. A sharp snap split the night. From the ground, a shard of bone jutted skyward, pale and glistening under the moonlight. Another followed, curved like a branch. Horror clamped Michael's chest as he realized. Ribs. The branches bent and twisted, joints snapping into place, forming the grotesque outline of a tree clawing its way toward the sky. Not one, dozens. All around him, the earth quivered. Skulls burst from the grass like fruit. Hollow eyes turned toward him. The graveyard writhed, birthing bone trees that groaned as they rose, their skeletal limbs grinding together with a sickening chorus. Michael's breath caught as he stumbled back toward the largest tomb. In the weak moonlight, he saw what made it worse. Many of the trees still clung to tatters of clothing, shoelaces, scraps of fabric, even the glint of a wristwatch. These were not relics of centuries past. They were the remains of the missing. The wind howled, carrying with it a sound more dreadful than any gale. The broken murmur of countless voices. Michael strained to listen, heart pounding, and heard them. Help us! Release us! The earth devours. His legs trembled, but terror chained his eyes to the sight before him. The bone forest climbed higher, trunks weaving into a pale lattice, skulls dangling like rotten fruit, clacking against one another in the cold air. Some rose 10 feet high, their limbs creaking as though eager to embrace him. The cemetery had become a living garden of the damned. Michael turned to flee, but the ground at his back split open too, bone shoots sprouting and snapping shut around him. He was trapped, hemmed in by dozens of reaching trunks. A shudder cut down his spine as one tree nearby bent toward him. Its ribs groaned, splintering as they spread open like fingers ready to seize their prey. The air thickened with the stench of damp earth and the sickly sweetness of rotting flesh. Michael gagged, bile rising in his throat. With a strangled cry, he hurled himself toward the massive tomb at the cemetery's heart. Its stone door hung ajar beneath the moonlight, waiting. He didn't hesitate. He plunged inside and slammed the heavy slab shut behind him. Darkness swallowed him whole. The silence pressed so deep he could hear only the hammering of his own blood. And then, from the depths of the crypt, a whisper unfurled, long and serpentine. You have entered the garden. Michael stiffened, ice coursing through his veins. In that moment he understood. He was no longer an observer. He was part of the soil now. Me, I see. Inside the stone tomb, the darkness was thick as a drowned sea. Michael pressed his back against the heavy door, breath ragged, ears still echoing with the brittle crack of bones outside. The air was rank with mold and the faint iron tang of dried blood, choking his lungs until he thought he might suffocate. He flicked on his flashlight. Its trembling beam cut across damp stone walls slick with moss. But it was not only stone. The surface was carved over and over, a mad tapestry of names etched in desperate haste, hundreds of them, clawed in Latin, Old English, and symbols Michael had never seen before. They sprawled like curses left behind by those who vanished. At the tomb's far end stood an altar. Upon it lay a cracked ceramic vessel brimming with fragments of bone, pale and granular like salt. From the floor, black roots wormed upward, coiling around the remains, feeding on them. Michael staggered back, chilled with realization. The earth here did not merely devour, it cultivated. A rasping voice rose from the shadows behind him. You've seen it now. Michael spun, light quivering across Elias, the gravekeeper, stepping forth from the dark. He still clutched his rusted spade, his coat dragging low, but the beam revealed something worse. His skin was fissured with cracks, in places peeling back to expose the bone beneath. Beneath that wrinkled husk, Elias was little more than another living tree of bone. What are you? Michael stammered. Elias chuckled, the sound sharp as snapping ribs. I am only the sour. You saw the garden outside. The soil thirsts for souls. It devours the dead, but without a hand to tend them, they would wither. I feed them. I watch over them. Michael trembled, yet curiosity forced the words from him. And the missing? They are your trees as well. Elias inclined his head slowly. The wanderers, the sinners, even the curious, like you. Any who set foot upon this land become seed for the garden. That is the covenant. The earth grants me existence, and in return, I plant. Call me monster, if you will. I have only kept my vow. Michael backed away, heart pounding. I can't stay here. Elias advanced, his shadow stretching across the walls, carved with the names of the dead. You are already here. The gate behind you will never open again. The earth has recognized you, and it craves you for its next tree. The flashlight shook in Michael's grip, its beam catching Elias's face. His eyes were no longer eyes at all, only gaping hollows. From his mouth writhed slender bone roots, squirming like parasites. Elias raised the spade, its handle blackened, its blade glinting cold. I do not kill you, he whispered. I plant you. The ground beneath Michael split apart, jagged cracks yawning wide. Skeletal hands thrust up, clutching at his ankles. He screamed, struggling, but the grip only tightened, dragging him inch by inch toward the soil. In that frantic instant, clarity struck him. He had only two paths: surrender to the earth's hunger, or shatter this vile covenant, whatever price it demanded, even if it cost his own life. And Elias stood above him, smiling faintly, the way a farmer smiles as the seed finally sinks into the waiting ground. Nah. Ingen, Umaya. Michael screamed, wrenching at his legs as skeletal hands clamped tighter, dragging him down. The pull tore his skin open, blood spilling into the soil, hungrily swallowed as if poured onto smoldering ash. Despair crushed his chest, suffocating every breath. No, I don't belong here. He clawed at the stone wall, desperate to resist the earth's hunger. Elias only watched, hollow eyes sinking deeper into shadow, his voice calm and resonant, like a litany whispered at the end of time. You belong to the garden the moment you set foot here. Your blood will enrich the soil. Your bones will bloom into new branches. Do not resist. Let the earth claim you. Michael's frantic gaze darted to the altar. The fractured clay urn lay there, brimming with bone dust, its surface tangled in writhing black roots that trembled like starving veins. A thought pierced his panic. If the garden's existence was bound to that vessel, breaking it might sever the pact. With the last of his strength, he lunged, clutching a jagged stone from the tomb wall. The skeletal hands gripped harder, pulling him waist-deep into the ground, but Michael roared, hurling the rock with all his fury at the urn. It shattered with a violent crack. Fragments flew, bone dust burst into the air like a pale storm. From beneath the earth rose a shriek, thousands of voices howling as one, an unholy choir of souls torn free. The skeletal hands around him convulsed, then loosened their grip. Elias's roar split the chamber, his voice breaking for the first time. You fool! You do not understand what you've done. The tomb quaked. The ceiling split, stones raining down. Michael scrambled free, dragging himself toward the sealed door. His hand pressed against the cold slab, then froze. His fingers were no longer flesh, but bare white bone, the skin shriveled and peeling away. He looked down in horror. His legs too were changing, skin splitting open, bones stretching outward like gnarled roots. The price of breaking the covenant was not freedom, But transformation. A seed, stronger, hungrier, was taking root. Elias writhed in the collapsing dark, yet laughter rasped from his withering throat. Did you think you escaped? No. You have only taken my place. Michael's scream curdled into the cracking of bone. His body bent and warped, limbs driving deep into the soil, veins hardening into root, joints twisting into branches. His mind dimmed, hollowed, until only the hunger remained, spreading, devouring, eternal. By dawn, the graveyard stood silent, cloaked in mist. The bone trees towered motionless, their pale branches gleaming like ivory. At the garden's heart rose a new trunk, its limbs stark white, and from them dangled a broken pen and a blood-stained notebook. The garden of bone had claimed another, and it would never cease to grow. Known. The rain had just stopped when Ethan and Claire arrived at the countryside house. The road behind them glistened in the moonlight, wet and silent, and the woods surrounding the property stood eerily still, as if holding their breath. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, an escape from the noise of the city, a short getaway to spend time together before life pulled them back into its endless routines. Ethan was the adventurous one, his restless curiosity often pushing him into situations Claire would rather avoid. To him, old places like this house were mysteries waiting to be uncovered, stories carved into the wood and stone. Claire, however, was the cautious soul. Sensitive to her surroundings, she often picked up on feelings or details that Ethan overlooked. Where he saw charm, she sensed shadows. The house looked older than it had in the photos. Its paint was faded, its windows cloudy with age, and the air that greeted them inside was colder than the rain-soaked night. Dust lingered in the hallways, and each step across the wooden floors gave off a faint, tired groan. Not exactly 5 stars, Ethan joked, tossing his bag onto a couch. His voice carried through the empty rooms, echoing faintly like the house was whispering back. Claire forced a smile, but her eyes wandered uneasily. Something about the silence unsettled her. It was the kind that pressed against the ears, making her feel like the house itself was listening. They carried their things upstairs to the bedroom. That was when they saw it. Against the far wall stood a tall mirror, framed in tarnished silver. Its glass cracked faintly along the edges. A thin sheet of dust veiled its surface, yet their reflections shone through clear and sharp. Too sharp. Neither of them noticed as they set down their bags and laughed off the creaks of the old house. That for a brief moment, just a flicker, their reflections didn't move when they did. The house was larger than they expected, yet it felt empty in a way that wasn't comforting. The ground floor stretched out in narrow hallways, leading to rooms that smelled faintly of mildew and dust. The kitchen looked abandoned, its wooden cupboards swollen from years of dampness, and the dining room still held a long table covered with a yellowed lace cloth. The furniture seemed frozen in time, as if the last guests had walked out decades ago and never returned. Upstairs, the bedrooms were simple, bare floors, faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, and that looming mirror in the largest room. It stood almost as tall as the ceiling, like a silent guardian watching over the space. Claire brushed her fingers along the cracked silver frame and shivered. "Feels colder here," she whispered. Ethan laughed it off. "Old houses always have drafts. It's just air seeping in." He grinned at her reflection. Besides, now we've got an antique mirror thrown in for free. That night, after settling in, the house began to show its true self. The lights flickered faintly, as if struggling to stay alive. The air inside grew heavier, colder than the night outside. When Claire walked past the mirror before bed, she froze. For a split second, she thought she saw Ethan's reflection still standing in front of it, smiling, while the real Ethan was already lying down on the bed behind her. Her breath caught, but when she blinked, the reflection was normal again. She told herself it was exhaustion. Later, as the couple tried to sleep, faint creaking echoed down the hall. Steady, deliberate, like footsteps pacing slowly across the wooden floor. Ethan sat up, listening. Must be the house settling, he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Claire clutched the blanket tighter. In the corner of the room, the mirror gleamed faintly, reflecting nothing but the dark. Nino! The nights inside the house only grew stranger. Each evening, the mirror seemed to pull their attention, its surface always gleaming faintly, even in darkness, as though it had its own source of light. On the second night, Claire awoke to a sound like faint tapping. She turned her head and froze. The mirror was no longer reflecting the room. Instead, it showed a dim hallway that stretched endlessly, darker than anything inside the house. At the far end, a figure stood motionless, its pale face blurred like smeared paint. She blinked, and the reflection was normal again. Ethan, half asleep, brushed it off. Dreams feel real sometimes. Don't scare yourself. But by the third night, even Ethan couldn't deny it. As he passed by the mirror, he stopped. His reflection had stayed behind. It grinned, wide and unnatural, even as Ethan's real face froze in shock. Then, with a blink, the reflection snapped back into sync. He stumbled back, laughing nervously. Must be a trick of the glass. Claire's voice trembled. No, Ethan, it's not the glass. Something's inside. That evening, the house came alive. Doors creaked open on their own. Shadows moved across the walls, without source. Whispers leaked through the hallways, soft and taunting, like laughter carried through the air. The mirror became the center of it all, its surface rippling faintly, as if it were water waiting to be touched. Drawn by both fear and fascination, Ethan couldn't stay away. Claire begged him to leave it alone, but he stepped closer, eyes locked on the shifting reflection. In the glass, the pale figure was back. This time clearer, with hollow eyes, and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. Its hand pressed against the other side of the mirror, and Ethan, trembling, lifted his own to match it. The surface of the mirror shuddered, then gave way like liquid. A skeletal hand shot out, clamping around Ethan's wrist. Ethan! Claire screamed, pulling at him. But the grip was too strong. With a violent jerk, Ethan was yanked forward, half his body disappearing into the glass. His eyes widened in terror as he cried out her name, and then, with one last desperate tug, the mirror swallowed him whole. Claire fell to the floor, sobbing, staring at her own reflection. Only this time, Ethan was still there, his face pressed against the inside of the glass, pounding silently, his mouth forming words she couldn't hear. Behind him, the pale figure wrapped its arms around him, dragging him deeper into the endless darkness. She ran, down the stairs, through the front door, into the cold night air. Her footsteps pounded against the dirt road until the house was nothing but a shadow behind her. Claire survived, but survival brought no peace. Days later, safe in her own apartment, she caught herself staring at her bathroom mirror. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw Ethan's face staring back at her from the other side, lips moving soundlessly, eyes filled with the same desperate plea as before. She turned away, trembling, but deep down she knew. Ethan was still there, trapped forever, and the mirror would never stop watching her. Wah! Shut. Weeks passed, but Claire never found peace. She avoided mirrors as much as she could, covering them with sheets, turning them to face the wall. But glass was everywhere. Windows, reflections in water, even the screen of her phone at night. Sometimes she thought she saw Ethan's eyes staring back. One morning, scrolling through the news, she froze. An article headline read, "Couple vanishes in countryside house. Only one returns." The photo showed the very house they had rented, police tape stretched across the front. The article mentioned strange reports from locals about figures in the windows and a mirror that doesn't reflect properly. Claire slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. The reflection in the black screen lingered just a second too long. Ethan was smiling. Yee.
My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance. I'm 32, former caregiver. Now, missing, or so the reports say. But I'm not gone. Not exactly. Hill House remembers. I never belonged anywhere. Not to my family, not to the world. But one day, a letter arrived from a man named Dr. Montague, a scholar of the paranormal. He wrote, "You are invited to Hill House. You've experienced phenomena. We seek to understand it. Understand it. As if it could be parsed like grammar. As if dread obeyed punctuation." I said yes. Hill House didn't welcome. It observed. It was wrong in all the right ways. Every angle slightly off. Doors that shut by themselves. Walls that whispered in drafts. It felt sentient. Not haunted, but constructed to haunt. There were 4 of us. The doctor. The laughing heir, Luke. The bright, dazzling Theodora. And me. They didn't know how breakable I was, but Hill House did. The first night pounding on the walls, like fists demanding entry. But the halls were empty. The second, words appeared on my wall. "Help Eleanor come home," written in chalk. A child's hand, but no one confessed. No one else seemed afraid. Theodora laughed. "How sweet," she said. But I wasn't amused. I heard the syntax of possession in those 5 words. Not plea, command. Hill House was speaking to me. By day, I wandered the house. I listened. Its creaks formed patterns. Its silences had intonation. Hill House didn't scream. It suggested. And I began to suggest things, too. That Theodora hated me. That Luke mocked me. That the doctor never intended to let me leave. I started talking to the house, at first quietly, then aloud, then only to the house. One night, I woke to laughter down the hall, then silence, then a child sobbing right beside my bed. No one was there, but my hand was being held. It took me hours to unclench my fingers. They were ice cold. I told the others. They said I'd imagined it, but the house knew, and that night it wrote again. Home. Theodora moved her things out of my room. Luke avoided my gaze. Even the doctor began asking if I was sleeping, if I was... Well, I laughed. Too loudly. Of course I was well. Hill House was the first place I had ever been seen. It heard me, and I heard it. Its architecture matched the blueprint of my mind. Rooms without exit. Stairs that turned in on themselves. Echoes that spoke first. They told me I had to leave, that the house was affecting me. I agreed. I packed. I smiled. And in the night, I took the car, but I didn't drive away. I drove in circles on the winding path outside Hill House, again and again, until the wheels left the gravel, until the trees rushed toward me. A whisper right before the crash. Stay, epilogue. They buried my body, said it was suicide, said I was unwell, but they don't understand language, not like I do. Hill House spoke to me. It still does. Now I walk its halls, my footsteps soft against ancient wood. Doors close behind me, not in malice, but greeting. I write messages on walls for the next girl, the next misfit, the next lonely soul who just wants to be heard. I am Eleanor, and this is my sentence. Hill House speaks, and I am its voice. My name is Evelyn Vale. I'm 27, formerly a governess, currently a patient. But I wasn't always this way. It began with a letter, handwritten, wax-sealed, elegant. A wealthy gentleman required someone discreet, educated, and trustworthy to care for 2 orphaned children at his country estate. Bly, 2 children, Flora and Miles. Perfect angels, the uncle said, but their care is entirely yours. I'm never to be contacted. Ever. I should have walked away. But I needed the cheer. Bly was beautiful, but too quiet. I remember my first morning, sunlight pouring across stone floors, the silence holding its breath. Flora was cheerful, dainty, bright-eyed, but oddly rehearsed. Miles had just returned from school, dismissed for unspecified reasons. He was charming, too charming, the kind that knows your boundaries before you speak them. And always that same phrase from them both. We're ever so happy you're here. Too happy. Too identical in tone, like they'd practiced it. It started on the 3rd evening. I looked up from the garden and saw a man at the tower, tall, pale, watching. I asked Mrs. Gross, the housekeeper. Her face fell. "Mr. Quint," she whispered, "but that's not possible. He died a fall on the ice months ago, but I saw him again the next night, closer, through the window. And Flora, who had been playing alone, was staring at him too. When I asked her who it was, she smiled. Nobody. Miss Jessel, Flora's old governess, also dead. Suicide in the lake. I began to keep notes, verbal cues, repeated phrases. Flora's syntax shifted when she mentioned Jessel. Her words mimicked older rhythms. Miles, too. His speech became layered with effect. Phrases a boy his age wouldn't know. Latin, legalese, things Quint might have said. I confronted them. They denied it all, but one night I found Miles whispering to the empty fireplace, not in English, in perfect mimicry of Quint's voice. Mrs. Gross said I was exhausted. That grief had softened my reason. But I know psycholinguistic corruption. I've studied how language encodes trauma, how children echo what they've heard in ways adults miss. These children weren't haunted, they were mirroring, repeating words not their own, smiling like puppets. And then I saw Miss Jessel, soaked, crying at Flora's bedside. Flora was asleep, but her lips moved, whispering syllables I couldn't decipher. And Miles began sleepwalking. I told myself I could protect them, shield them. So I watched, every night. I followed the whispering, listened at doors. Then one dawn, Miles vanished. I found him in the schoolroom, standing alone, smiling, pale. "Is he here?" I asked. He nodded. "He's inside." And he tapped his own chest. I begged him to fight, to say something that was truly his. He looked up, eyes wide, lips parted. But the words that came out were not his voice. He died in my arms. No wound, no sign of struggle, just stopped breathing like a candle snuffed. Flora wouldn't look at me. Mrs. Gross took her away. I was left alone in Bly. The children were gone. The ghosts were gone. but the language remained. Words etched into the walls in invisible ink, voices in my sleep speaking in Miles's tone, repeating that final whisper. He's inside. Now when I speak, sometimes it's in a voice not my own. When I write, my handwriting changes. I know what people say, that I lost my mind, that I killed a boy out of hysteria. But I was a linguist, a psychologist. I know possession when I see it. And sometimes it doesn't take demons or ghosts. Sometimes it's a sentence, a phrase repeated too many times. A child learning the wrong lesson, and Bly is still there, empty, waiting, with a mirror in the tower, and two shadows that never left the lake. If you go there, don't speak to the children, especially if they smile and say, "We're ever so happy you're here."